So after Ghost Machine, does it look like Torchwood is heading in the right direction? Well, all it needs is a more fixed tone and less pointless scenes. And this week we have the first and so far only returning villain from Doctor Who to appear in Torchwood. So it can't be that bad, right? Oh shit, it's a cyber bikini. This is going to be interesting because, well, I quite like Cyberwoman, not the cyber bikini, but let's start from the beginning. I have the feeling this is going to be quite controversial because over the years, the early episodes of Torchwood have garnered a reputation of being some of the oddest and apparently bad installments from within the Doctor Who universe, this being the crowning achievement due to its mixed gender politics and the Deus Ex Machina of all Deus Ex Machinas. But before I go into that, I need to start from the beginning and talk about who this episode is focused on. As I've mentioned in the first review, Yanto was a lovely and charming enigma who hung around in the background to give off warmth and fun quips. But this episode does a great job for his character because of the way it recontextualises those moments from earlier. I love it when a show has an episode where it reveals something has been happening behind the scenes without the characters knowing, and this episode is no exception. With the twist, as I love the revelation of the characters finding the cyber conversion unit and finding it wrong and scary enough to strike the fear of God into them as it resurrects fears from the recent Cybermen invasion. That being said, I don't understand how Gwen doesn't know what they are. Was she scuba diving with Donna in Spain or something? If I can nitpick some things to do with this revelation, then I would love to know how Yanto managed to sneak all of those things into the base without anyone noticing. Because if we take fragments from Series 2 in consideration, it seems like it took Yanto ages to get the job. Well, was she during this? Was she in his flat or something? That's a story I'm sure Big Finish will cover at some point, but for the time being, it's very much a plot hole, along with Gwen not recognising the cyber design for some reason. The episode opens really well, as the team go about their business in a way which we would expect them to, but the camera lingers on Yanto this time, who seems different and sad for some reason. The appearance of the Doctor gives us an idea Yanto is hiding something, and the first appearance of the Cyberwoman herself is actually nicely done, even if the design of the cybersuit heavily undercuts the moment. Actually, let's talk about that suit for a moment, because otherwise I'm going to mention it a few times that the general hideous of the thing pretty much ruined my overall impression of the story. This episode, while still being flawed, was so close to being a home run, but just stumbled with this element. I mean, the 2006 Cybermen look great, they look shiny and heavy as well as being actually metal, or at least looking actually metal, but in this cybersuit, even if you ignore the bikini, it still looks plastic and bendable. That's not even mentioning said bikini, and speaking personally, I do not find this arousing in the slightest, despite it obviously being the intention of the production team to do so. She's even got a cyber heel, for crying out loud. I think the only thing that could make this design worse is that if you listen to some of the producers talking about it, it is so clear they just designed something they found attractive and actually took pride in the fact that it is something they hope men will have in a poster on their wall, and I assume took off to.
I think you want to give the fans a poster. And there's one thing to have a poster of a Cyberman or something, but there's going to be a lot of guys who want to have the cyber babe on the wall, and that's what she's going to be,
But let's talk about the rest of the episode, because this design just makes me angry because of the objectification and sexual reasoning behind it. So I won't dwell on that anymore, because there is a lot of the rest of the episode I really like. Apparently, when Russell started putting the pitch together for Torchwood after BBC Three asked him for spin-off proposals, one of the first things he thought of was to make the show original and separate from the main show, outside of two elements, that being Jack himself, and the second being a new exploration of the Cybermen in a storyline which coincided with the overall show's focus on the fallout of Canary Wharf, that being the last Cyberman, or Cyberwoman. I also think Chibnall was the right way to go with asking someone to write this episode, because if Series 12 is anything to go by, then he has a fascination in partially converted Cybermen body horror, as well as the mindset being what could drive someone to want to become a Cyberman. So in a way, this episode was a template for Ashad. I always love seeing a writer explore an idea they've had for a story, except on a smaller scale, and this episode is no exception because I still find it fascinating to see Chibnall experiment with these ideas. But while this episode is focused on that high concept body horror, it would need something to keep it down to earth so the episode could fit with Torchwood's more character-based storytelling. And of course, it was a stroke of genius to have one of the main Torchwood members turn against the rest of the team because of the emotional impact of losing a loved one. If you think about it, the team could have quite easily dealt with this if it wasn't for the emotions running rampant amongst them all, and I think that's a brilliant idea. It's what makes this episode work so well, because after the power goes out, the characters go into full survival mode and know what they have to do, but what is stopping them from making this a simple task is the emotional connection which Yanto has for Lisa. Another thing which works really well is the fact that the cyber conversion unit does come into play in a Chekhov's gun type of way. The unit needs to be there so at least it can stay alive, but then afterwards you start wondering why they didn't just use a normal life support machine. So the idea of shutting down the power because Gwen is at risk gives the episode stakes and gives the device purpose outside of just some technobabble. If they had used an ordinary life support machine, then this wouldn't have worked nearly as well. But after this does happen, we sort of get Torchwood's answer to the Doctor Who based on the Siege format. And I say Torchwood's response to the Doctor Who based on the Siege format because when they are in Doctor Who in a base under siege, it is a matter of just the Doctor getting the right pieces together in order to save everyone. But not here, because these people are not the Doctor. They do not have anything to risk, as aside from Jack, one shot and they are dead. This gives the episodes a brilliant sense of stakes while also tying itself into Doctor Who well enough to work, but not so much that it doesn't stand on its own. It is a brilliant survival horror story and you can never change my mind on that. But the other characters don't get that much of a showing. However, there are a couple of attempts at one-off or at least micro arcs in this story, or at least there are some setups for arcs to happen later on in the series, such as the kiss between Owen and Gwen. I forget Owen's reasoning for doing this, but while it did lead to some good drama later on, and also some fantastic character moments, I feel the writers just wanted these moments to happen, but couldn't think of anything to lead to them, and just chucked this incredibly forced and unnatural moment in, just because. Tosh doesn't get much of a showing in the episode either, and by this point it meant that she was the only main character in the show who didn't have an episode centred on her, making the episodes such as Greek Sparing Gifts a lot more interesting due to the fact we had basically been robbed of any interesting material with it. Gwen is used well as an audience surrogate as well because she is the newest member of the team and therefore doesn't know Yanto as well as the rest of them do, and she's therefore able to sympathise with them a lot more. This means there is less of a betrayal for Gwen as there would be for the audience. There is also a really creepy moment involving Tosh, which she is asked by Jack to leave the hub so there are less characters to write for. To restore the power. Sorry, it's just so hard to tell sometimes. But while Tosh doesn't get much to do, nor does Jack, but I think he gets away with it with good reasoning, because throughout the first series, we've been seeing Jack trying to get used to the fact he's immortal. Throughout Torchwood, we see him go from a flawed character who still has a fear of death and a natural reaction to dangerous situations, to how he is in Children of Earth, where, like some of the characters say, the immortal man has nothing to fear. But this fear is furthered when you see him get killed by that Cyberwoman. There is still the worry that this time he may not be coming back, a feeling I'm sure any immortal person would feel if they existed. And this is because we know Jack came about being immortal because Rose was unable to control her power, so the state he is in is a reaction to human error, also meaning that we have to account for the fact Rose's impact could wear off at any point, because of the same factor of human error. This creates an interesting level of stakes for Jack, and it's also a clever way to keep him out of the way for the rest of the story, meaning the team have nothing to sacrifice, or at least Gwen doesn't, because Owen and Tosh didn't know he was immortal. Something I was never quite sure why they did, other than to contrive the surprise for the end of the series where Jack comes back after the team flip out. This would have worked if they had worked in an actual reason for Jack to keep this a secret, as well as giving the moment Owen snaps and kills him some weight in that story, but let's not go there quite yet. Subscribe to Frazzles Reviews if you want to see me absolutely demolish the Series 1 finale. The final act of the story seems to be the reason most people dislike this episode, as I think other than the design of the Cyberwoman, the first half an hour is actually really good. We've got some great stakes and a brilliant base under siege setup, which manages to separate itself from the Doctor Who tropes and turn it into a genuinely terrifying and risky situation where the characters will and have to try everything they need in order to survive. As for the final act of the episode, I still find it to be just as good as the first half hour, for the most part. Now, of course, the crowning achievement and absolute worst moment of the episode is the dinosaur defeating the Cyberwoman after Jack covered it with barbecue sauce. It looks awful, and even from a script perspective, it's awful. This is odd because tonally the episode seemed to know what it wanted to do, and from a direction point of view, the lighting and most of the camera angles really work. So this is only here to contrive a way to get the characters out of the base, which is easy writing to say the least. At least there were 1,001 better ways to get the team out of the base than this. So when the team get outside of the base, the writing becomes a bit hit and miss for me. I love the way Jack lashes out at Yanto and says if he doesn't do what he tells him to, then he will kill both of them. And I like how the show isn't afraid to show the corrupt side of Jack yet, and how he is willing to threaten death if it means he doesn't get what he thinks is right. But then we get Yanto saying, "You act like you're the hero, but you're the biggest monster of us all. Not that bad of a Welsh, but the line sounds dark and interesting. But if you think about it, it's just really a very generic line that I hear pretty much in every movie or show trying to create an ambiguous character. I think Gwen really works well in this scene as well, however, and further shows her use in the team as a human perspective for the characters who are slowly losing their humanity. And back in the base after Yanto decided to go in, and still ambiguous as to whether he's going to kill her or not, I think the scenes with the pizza girl are really well done. She seems nice and sweet, so picturing her being cut open and ripped from her own body is genuinely disturbing. This is one of those occasions where I have to remind myself that the actor is actually alive and well, because her death was so horrifying. The scenes between her and Yanto are decent as well. Gareth David Lloyd is overacting a bit, but I still think it's nice. I see a lot of criticism for this dialogue, for it being weird stuff to point out, and as why would you find someone forgetting to descale their kettle or finding a dog pissing in your tent romantic? But I can buy this dialogue and find it moving. Yanto probably didn't have any grand romantic gestures with Lisa, so there's nothing for her to refer to here. Their relationship probably began as a simple offers romance because they just enjoyed each other's company. Not every love story is a Hugh Grant, Richard Curtis rom-com, where they run through the rain to tell someone they love them. And some people just find romance in sharing a sleeping bag together or finding an inside joke. I think out of context, some of these moments would sound ridiculous, but then truly that's the point. As a character, the Cyberwoman gets a really good send-off as the interesting character she is, unlike the character she ended up acting as the inspiration for. I also like the mixture of human and Cyberman in her character here, such as the way she alters her voice and wants Yanto to love her, which is unlike a Cyberman, but believes they can only truly be together if they fully convert, which is very much like a Cyberman. But then one of the best moments in the episode happens when the characters appear basically out of nowhere and they force themselves into Yanto's life as the people he was going to have to be loyal to, a decision he was struggling with because he couldn't decide which one to choose, so they choose for him. Despite Yanto being warm, lovely and friendly in later Torchwood stories, it's now twinged with tragedy no matter how happy he seems because he was forced to do this. Other notes to talk about in this episode are the final moments where Jack, for some reason, allows Yanto to be back into the team again with his newfound loyalty. It is a little odd that they just decided to trust Yanto just randomly again, but then again they didn't specify the amount of time Yanto was away, so Jack could have been going through some kind of consideration with the rest of the Torchwood team over the course of, say, a week or something. It would have been nice to have this clarified though, and it's very probably just another plot hole, but it still works nice. Then Jack had a nice moment about how he felt about dying in that moment, as we're reminded he is not able to die, but is still scared of dying, setting up a theme to be explored later on in the series, which they didn't manage to finish, but nevertheless was a very nice moment in this context, and still acts as a nice idea that hangs around Jack's character. The story then ends with the team as they were at the beginning of the story, but different this time. Of course, their relationship and trust in each other is the same as it always was, but the audience and the team itself now know their dynamic is tinged with tragedy, as Yanto didn't choose this. It was forced upon him, and because of that, they will never be the same again. And that was Cyberwoman. People are probably going to be annoyed at me for praising a Chibnall script, but I stand by the fact it is a good episode, weighed down by its few but still major flaws. The design of the cybersuit is appalling and clearly just wank bait for the design team, but there are some incredible moments, but also some very odd moments and dialogue choices, but also great character work, and overall it's a great based on the Siege story that isn't afraid to go all in and pays off because of that. For 45 sweet minutes, it seemed like Torchwood was heading down the right path, forging its own identity with strong themes and great characters. It's just a shame that the next episode destroyed all of that, as we are back in bad territory, with not just the worst episode we've reviewed so far, but what could turn out to be the worst episode of the show ever. But we're getting ahead of ourselves and you'll have to wait to see. See you all next time.